Spring, 1945. The war in Europe is collapsing. In a quiet corner of the American Midwest, the morning sun filters through the high windows of a converted barracks. The air is cool, tinged with the scent of soap and damp wood. Inside, a group of German women, former auxiliaries, nurses, and clerks, stand in line, clutching towels and fresh uniforms issued by their captors. Their faces are drawn, eyes wary, shoulders tense with the memory of defeat and the uncertainty of captivity. A door swings open. Warm steam billows out, carrying the unfamiliar fragrance of lye soap. One by one, the women step into the shower room, their footsteps echoing on the tiled floor. For a moment, there is only silence and the sound of running water. Then, tentative laughter. Relief. The soap is real. The water is clean. No guards shouting, no fear of humiliation or violence, just the simple, almost forgotten comfort of washing away the dirt and fear of war. For these women, the first shower in America is more than a routine. It is a revelation. In a world turned upside down, the smallest kindness can feel like a miracle. By the final year of World War II, the European continent was a landscape of devastation and uncertainty. The Allied armies pressed relentlessly from the west, while the Soviet juggernaut advanced from the east. For millions of Germans, soldiers, civilians, and those caught somewhere in between, the world they had known was vanishing beneath the thunder of artillery and the collapse of the Reich. Among the most overlooked figures in this chaos were the German women who served the war effort. Some wore the uniforms of the Wehrmacht or Luftwaffe auxiliaries, working as clerks, radio operators, or nurses. Others were conscripted into labor battalions, assigned to support roles near the front or in occupied territories. By 1944, as the war turned against Germany, the need for manpower became so desperate that women were increasingly drawn into the machinery of war, their fates tied to the fortunes of the collapsing regime. For these women, the prospect of capture by the advancing Allies was fraught with fear. Nazi propaganda had painted a grim picture of enemy brutality, warning that surrender meant humiliation, abuse, or worse. The memory of the Eastern Front, where stories of violence and retribution at the hands of the Soviets were all too real, cast a long shadow over the minds of those facing the Americans and British. Even as the Western Allies maintained a reputation for discipline and adherence to the Geneva Convention, uncertainty and dread lingered. The reality of surrender was often sudden and disorienting. In the spring of 1945, as American forces swept through France, Belgium, and into the heart of Germany, thousands of German women found themselves behind enemy lines. Some were captured in the chaos of retreat, others rounded up in liberated towns and villages. The process was methodical. Prisoners were disarmed, searched, and marched to temporary holding areas. For many, the journey into captivity began with a long, silent walk under the watchful eyes of armed guards. The initial days of imprisonment were marked by confusion and anxiety. The women, stripped of their uniforms and separated from their male counterparts, were processed through makeshift camps hastily established in former schools, barns, or open fields. The conditions were basic: cots or straw mattresses, communal latrines, and little privacy. Food was simple but sufficient: bread, soup, and sometimes a piece of fruit or cheese. The routines were unfamiliar, the language barrier daunting. Yet, even in these early days, there were signs that captivity in the West would be different from the horrors many had feared. American guards, though stern, maintained order without cruelty. Red Cross representatives appeared, distributing care packages and checking on the welfare of the prisoners. Medical staff treated wounds and illnesses, often with a professionalism that surprised those who had been taught to expect only hostility. For the German women, the transition from enemy to prisoner was a journey through uncertainty. The world outside the barbed wire was in ruins, but inside the camp, A new reality was taking shape, one governed by rules, routines, and, occasionally, small acts of unexpected kindness. It was in this environment that the first rumors began to circulate. The Americans would allow the women to shower, not just with water but with real soap. For many, it sounded too good to be true, a story to be met with skepticism, even fear. But as the days passed and the routines of camp life settled in, the promise of a simple shower became a symbol of something larger, the possibility that captivity, while still a hardship, might also offer moments of dignity and relief. The American system for handling prisoners of war was shaped by both international law and the practical demands of a global conflict. As a signatory to the 1929 Geneva Convention, the United States was committed to the humane treatment of all POWs, regardless of gender or rank. This commitment was not merely a matter of policy, it was a point of national pride, a way to distinguish American conduct from the brutality that had come to define so much of the war in Europe. By 1944, the U.S. military had established a network of POW camps across the United States, far from the front lines and the chaos of the collapsing Reich. These camps were often located in rural areas, converted fairgrounds, former civilian conservation corps sites, or hastily constructed barracks on the outskirts of small towns. The arrival of German prisoners, including women, was a source of curiosity and sometimes anxiety for local communities. But the camps themselves were models of order and efficiency. Upon arrival, German women were processed with a thoroughness that reflected both security concerns and a commitment to proper care. Personal belongings were catalogued, medical examinations conducted, and each prisoner was issued a uniform, plain, durable, and stripped of insignia. The women were assigned to separate quarters, often with additional privacy measures in place. Female guards and medical staff were brought in where possible, and the Red Cross maintained a regular presence, monitoring conditions and advocating for the prisoners' welfare. The daily routine in the camps was strict but predictable. Roll call at dawn, followed by breakfast, usually porridge or bread with jam. Work assignments varied. Some women worked in the camp kitchens, others tended gardens or helped with laundry. There were classes in English, occasional lectures, and, for those who wished, religious services. Letters could be sent and received, subject to censorship, but still a vital link to the world beyond the wire. Hygiene was a priority, both for health and morale. The Americans understood that disease could spread quickly in crowded conditions, and regular bathing was enforced. But for the German women, the idea of a communal shower, especially one with real soap, was both unfamiliar and unsettling. In wartime Germany, soap was a luxury, rationed and often replaced with harsh substitutes. The scarcity of basic hygiene supplies had been a daily reality, and the prospect of a hot shower with fragrant American soap seemed almost fantastical. The first time the women were led to the shower block, there was palpable tension. Memories of Nazi propaganda, which had twisted the image of showers into something sinister, lingered in the minds of many. But the reality was starkly different. The shower rooms were clean, the water hot, and the soap plentiful. American guards stood by, but their demeanor was professional, not threatening. For the women, the experience was transformative, a moment of physical and psychological relief that cut through the fear and uncertainty of captivity. This simple act, bathing with real soap, became a symbol of the unexpected humanity that could exist even in the midst of war. It was a small mercy, but one that resonated deeply with those who had endured years of deprivation and propaganda. The story spread quickly through the camp, and for many, it marked the beginning of a new understanding that life as a prisoner in America, while still marked by loss and longing, could also offer moments of dignity and hope. As the weeks turned into months, the routines of camp life became familiar. The women adapted, forming friendships, sharing stories, and finding ways to maintain their sense of self in a world defined by fences and rules. The memory of that first shower, of clean water, fragrant soap, and the simple act of being treated as a human being remained a touchstone, a reminder that even in captivity, there could be moments of grace. Inside the American camps, the days unfolded with a strange blend of monotony and revelation. For the German women, the initial shock of capture gave way to a slow, uncertain adaptation. Many had spent weeks on the run, hiding in ruined towns or trudging through the mud of a defeated homeland. Their arrival in America was surreal, a journey across the Atlantic, far from the devastation of Europe, into a world that was both foreign and oddly peaceful. The emotional landscape was complex. Fear lingered, rooted in memories of propaganda and the trauma of war. Some women wept in private, mourning lost families and shattered futures. Others clung to routines, finding comfort in the predictability of camp life. The act of showering with real soap, a simple, everyday ritual, became a powerful symbol of change. For the first time in years, they could wash away the grime and fear, if only for a moment. The scent of soap, the warmth of water, the privacy of a closed door. These small mercies became lifelines, reminders of a world beyond war. Friendships formed in unlikely places. Women who had once served in different branches of the German war effort now shared stories, laughter, and the quiet solidarity of survival. Some found themselves opening up to American Guards or Red Cross workers, discovering a shared humanity that defied the boundaries of language and allegiance. The emotional journey was not linear. Grief and guilt mingled with relief and gratitude, but within the wire, a fragile sense of hope began to take root. For the U.S. military, the treatment of German POWs, especially women, was a matter of both principle and strategy. The Geneva Convention provided a legal framework, but the motivations ran deeper. American commanders understood that the way prisoners were treated could have far-reaching consequences, both during and after the war. Humane treatment was a tool of psychological warfare, a way to undermine enemy propaganda and encourage surrender. The presence of women in the camps presented unique challenges. Security was paramount, but so was the need to maintain discipline and prevent abuse. Camp commanders issued strict orders. All prisoners, regardless of gender, were to be treated with respect. The Red Cross was given broad access, and any reports of mistreatment were investigated swiftly. The goal was clear, not only to uphold American values, but to demonstrate them to the world. This approach was not without its difficulties. Some guards struggled with resentment or suspicion, shaped by years of brutal combat and the memory of atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. Others found themselves moved by the vulnerability of the women in their care. The act of providing soap and showers was more than a matter of hygiene. It was a statement of intent, a way to assert control over the narrative of captivity. The Americans also recognized the intelligence value of humane treatment. Prisoners who felt safe and respected were more likely to cooperate, to share information, and to become sources of insight into the enemy's mindset. The camps became sites of quiet interrogation, where trust was built not through coercion, but through the slow accumulation of small acts of decency. The American POW camps were feats of organization and logistics. Rows of barracks, surrounded by barbed wire and watchtowers, housed thousands of prisoners in relative safety. The infrastructure was basic but effective: latrines, kitchens, infirmaries, and, crucially, shower blocks. Hygiene was a top priority, both to prevent disease and to maintain morale. Soap, a commodity scarce in wartime Europe, was supplied in abundance. The U.S. Army sourced it from domestic manufacturers, ensuring that every prisoner had access to regular bathing. The showers themselves were simple: rows of nozzles, tiled floors, and drains. But to the German women, they represented a world of difference. The water was hot, the soap fragrant, and the experience transformative. Medical care was another cornerstone of camp life. American doctors and nurses treated wounds, illnesses, and the lingering effects of malnutrition. The Red Cross provided additional supplies, bandages, vitamins, and, when possible, comfort items like chocolate or books. For many women, it was the first time in years they had received proper medical attention. The combination of hygiene and health care became a foundation for recovery, both physical and psychological. The presence of German women in American POW camps required a new kind of leadership, one that balanced discipline with empathy, security with dignity. For American camp commanders, the responsibility was clear: uphold the standards of the Geneva Convention, maintain order, and ensure the safety of all prisoners. This meant adapting procedures that had been designed for male combatants to the unique needs of female prisoners. American officers issued explicit instructions to their guards. There was to be no fraternization, no abuse, and no tolerance for disrespect. Female guards and medical staff were assigned wherever possible, and the Red Cross was encouraged to maintain a visible presence. Inspections were frequent, and any complaints were taken seriously. The leadership understood that the eyes of the world and history were upon them. On the German side, the reaction was more complicated. Some women had held positions of authority within the Nazi regime, accustomed to command and discipline. In captivity, these former leaders struggled to maintain a sense of order among their fellow prisoners. Some tried to enforce military routines, organizing roll calls or assigning chores. Others withdrew, unable to reconcile their former status with the reality of defeat. The transition from authority to powerlessness was a profound psychological challenge, one that played out quietly in the daily life of the camp. For the German women, captivity in America was not just a physical ordeal, it was a moral and social crisis. Nazi propaganda had drilled into them the idea that surrender was a betrayal, a stain that could never be washed away. The regime's narrative was clear: true Germans fought to the end, and those who surrendered were cowards or traitors. This stigma weighed heavily on the women. Some refused to write home, fearing that their families would disown them. Others crafted careful letters, omitting any mention of kindness or comfort, afraid that such admissions would be seen as weakness. The knowledge that their experiences would be misunderstood or never spoken of at all was a burden that many carried for the rest of their lives. The American Guards, too, were shaped by their own propaganda. Years of war had fostered suspicion and resentment, and some struggled to see the prisoners as anything other than the enemy. Yet, over time, the daily reality of camp life, shared routines, small acts of kindness, the simple humanity of those in their care began to erode these barriers. The enemy became individuals, each with their own story, their own pain. The American POW camps became crucibles of moral decision-making. For the guards and commanders, every interaction was a test of values. The temptation to dehumanize the enemy was ever present, especially in the wake of news from the front, stories of concentration camps, atrocities, and the suffering inflicted by the Nazi regime. Yet, the leadership insisted on a higher standard. The treatment of prisoners was not just a matter of law, but of conscience. For the German women, the moral dilemmas were equally profound. Survival meant accepting kindness from the enemy, finding comfort in the routines of captivity, and, in some cases, forming bonds with those they had been taught to hate. The act of showering with soap, so simple, so ordinary, became a moment of reckoning. It was a reminder that even in the midst of war, there could be moments of grace. The camps were not free from conflict. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and the ever-present tension of life behind barbed wire. But there were also moments of forgiveness, of laughter, of shared humanity. The boundaries between right and wrong, friend and foe, were tested and, sometimes, quietly redrawn as the war drew to a close. These experiences would leave a lasting mark, not just on the women who lived them, but on the memory of a world struggling to find its way back to peace. April 1945. The war in Europe is in its final violent throes. Across the battered landscapes of Germany and occupied France, the last pockets of resistance are collapsing. For the German women serving as auxiliaries, nurses, and clerks, the end comes not with a final battle, but with the slow, grinding inevitability of defeat. In the chaos of retreat, many are separated from their units. Some are captured in the ruins of bombed-out towns, others rounded up in the countryside as American columns advance. The process is swift and impersonal. Hands raised, weapons discarded, names taken down by young American soldiers who are as exhausted as their prisoners. The women are marched to temporary holding areas, fields ringed with barbed wire, guarded by men whose faces betray a mix of suspicion and relief. The first hours of captivity are a blur. The women are searched, their belongings catalogued, their uniforms replaced with plain camp clothing. The fear is palpable. Rumors swirl of retribution, of humiliation, of the unknown fate that awaits them in the hands of the enemy. Some women cling to each other, whispering prayers or silent reassurances. Others retreat inward, their faces masks of resignation. Transport comes quickly. Trucks and trains carry the prisoners west, away from the front lines and the devastation of their homeland. The journey is long and uncomfortable, punctuated by the uncertainty of what lies ahead. For many, the sight of the American flag, flying over a camp in the French countryside or on the docks of a port city, marks the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by captivity, but also, unexpectedly, by relief. The Atlantic crossing is a surreal experience. The women, herded onto ships alongside other prisoners, stare out at the endless expanse of water. The air is thick with the mingled scents of salt, diesel, and fear. Some try to sleep, others watch the horizon, searching for any sign of land. The journey is marked by routine, meals served at regular intervals, medical checks, the ever-present roll call. The Americans are efficient, their discipline a stark contrast to the chaos left behind. Arrival in the United States is both a shock and a reprieve. The camps are nothing like the prisons of Nazi Germany or the horror stories spread by wartime propaganda. Instead, the women find themselves in orderly compounds, rows of barracks, clean latrines, kitchens staffed by fellow prisoners. The guards are watchful but not cruel. The Red Cross is everywhere, distributing care packages and checking on the welfare of the new arrivals. It is here, in the heart of America, that the turning point comes. The women are led, in small groups, to the shower blocks. The memory of Nazi propaganda, of showers used as instruments of death, lingers in the back of their minds. The tension is thick as they step inside, clutching towels and bars of soap issued by the camp staff. The reality is disarming. The water is hot, the soap fragrant and plentiful. There are no shouts, no threats, only the quiet murmur of women rediscovering a simple comfort. For some, the experience is overwhelming. Tears mix with laughter, as the dirt and fear of war are washed away. The act of bathing, so mundane in peacetime, becomes a moment of profound relief, a signal that, despite everything, they have survived. Outside the shower block, the mood shifts. The women emerge, wrapped in clean towels, their faces transformed by the simple act of being clean. The guards, seeing the change, relax their posture. The Red Cross workers smile, offering words of encouragement in halting German. For a brief moment, the boundaries between captor and captive blur, replaced by a shared recognition of humanity. The showers become a symbol, a turning point in the journey from enemy to prisoner, from fear to hope. The women begin to adapt to camp life, forming routines and friendships, finding ways to reclaim a sense of self. The memory of that first shower, of soap and water and the absence of cruelty, becomes a touchstone, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there can be moments of grace. As the days pass, the story spreads through the camp. New arrivals are greeted with knowing smiles and quiet reassurances. The Americans, for their part, take pride in the small mercies they are able to offer. The war is not yet over, but within the wire, a fragile peace has begun to take hold. Inside the American POW camps, the days settled into a rhythm that was both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. The initial shock of capture faded, replaced by the routines of a new life behind barbed wire. For the German women, each day began with roll call, the sound of names echoing across the compound as the sun rose over the distant fields of the American Midwest or the Southern Plains. Breakfast followed. Bread, porridge, sometimes a boiled egg or a piece of fruit. The food was plain, but plentiful, a stark contrast to the rationing and hunger many had endured in the final months of the war. The women ate together in mess halls, their conversations a mix of relief, homesickness, and cautious optimism. The guards watched, but their presence was more protective than threatening. Over time, the atmosphere softened, suspicion giving way to a kind of mutual respect. Work assignments filled the mornings. Some women worked in the camp kitchens, others tended vegetable gardens or helped with laundry. There were classes in English, organized by the Red Cross or by enterprising prisoners themselves. For those who wished, there were religious services, moments of quiet reflection in a world that had been turned upside down. Letters could be sent and received, though every word was carefully censored. Still, the chance to write home, to reassure loved ones of their survival, was a lifeline. But it was the shower block that remained the heart of the camp's transformation. The memory of that first shower, of hot water, real soap, and the absence of fear became a story retold again and again. For women who had spent months in the mud and ruins of a defeated Germany, the simple act of bathing was a revelation. The soap, smooth and fragrant, was a luxury they had not known in years. The water, clean and warm, washed away not just the dirt of war, but the weight of propaganda and dread. The guards, at first wary, soon recognized the importance of these small comforts. They ensured that the showers were kept clean, that soap was always available, that privacy was respected. The Red Cross continued its visits, bringing not just supplies but news from the outside world. Occasionally, American nurses or female staff would join the routines, offering medical care and a gentle word in broken German. For the German women, these moments of care were both comforting and disorienting. They had been taught to expect cruelty, to brace for humiliation, or worse. Instead, they found themselves treated with a dignity that challenged everything they had been told about the enemy. Some struggled with guilt, surviving when so many had not, finding comfort in the hands of those they had once feared. Others embraced the new reality, determined to make the best of their circumstances. The camp became a world apart, governed by its own rules and rhythms. Friendships formed across lines of age, background, and experience. Women who had once served in different branches of the German war effort now shared stories, laughter, and the quiet solidarity of survival. The act of showering with soap, so ordinary in peacetime, became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even in captivity, life could be rebuilt, one small mercy at a time. As the weeks turned into months, the war outside the wire drew to a close. News of Germany's surrender arrived in fragments, whispered rumors, official announcements, the sudden cessation of air raid drills. The women gathered in small groups, listening to the radio, reading newspapers, trying to imagine what the future might hold. Some wept with relief, others with grief for all that had been lost. In these final days, the boundaries between captor and captive blurred even further. American guards congratulated the women on the end of the war, some even shaking hands or offering small gifts. The women, in turn, expressed gratitude in the only ways they could. Bows, quiet words, the careful tending of the camp's gardens, the realization that they had survived, that they would return home, was both a blessing and a burden. For many, the camp would remain a memory of unexpected kindness, a place where, against all odds, humanity had prevailed. The story of the showers, of soap and water and dignity, would travel with them back across the ocean, a quiet testament to the possibility of compassion even in the aftermath of war. The end of the war brought a wave of relief and uncertainty that swept through every American POW camp. On May 8, 1945, the news of Germany's unconditional surrender echoed across the world, carried by radio broadcasts and the subdued celebrations of both captors and captives. For the German women in American camps, the moment was bittersweet. The war was over, but the future was a blank page, one filled with questions, anxieties, and the hope of return. Repatriation was a complex and carefully managed process. The U.S. military, working closely with the International Red Cross, began preparing lists of prisoners eligible for return. Medical checks were performed, and each woman was issued new clothing, plain but clean, along with a small bundle of personal belongings. The camps buzzed with nervous anticipation as rumors of departure dates and transport ships spread from barrack to barrack. The journey home was both physical and emotional. For many, it began with a train ride to a coastal port, followed by a long voyage across the Atlantic. The ships were crowded, the air thick with the mingled scents of salt, diesel, and anticipation. Some women stood on deck for hours, watching the horizon, searching for the first glimpse of Europe. Others huddled below, writing letters or sharing stories with friends made in captivity. Arrival in Germany was a shock. The country they returned to was not the one they had left. Cities lay in ruins, families were scattered, and the old certainties had been swept away by defeat. The women disembarked in silence, clutching their bundles, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension. The Red Cross and local authorities processed the returnees, offering what little assistance they could in a nation struggling to rebuild. But the challenges were only beginning. The stigma of surrender was profound. In post-war Germany, former POWs, especially women, were often met with suspicion or outright hostility. Some families welcomed their daughters home with open arms, grateful for their survival. Others turned away, unable to reconcile the shame of captivity with the ideals of sacrifice and loyalty that had been drilled into them by years of Nazi propaganda. American reports on the repatriation process were generally positive. The U.S. military took pride in its adherence to the Geneva Convention, documenting the humane treatment of prisoners and the orderly return of captives. Red Cross officials echoed these assessments, noting the gratitude expressed by many of the women as they departed. In rare interviews and post-war testimonies, a few German women described their time in the camps as a period of unexpected safety and dignity, a stark contrast to the horrors they had survived and the fears they had been taught. Yet, the reality was more complicated. The women carried invisible scars, memories of war, loss, and the daily negotiation of identity in a world that saw them as both survivors and outcasts. Some found solace in the friendships they had formed in captivity, maintaining contact with former guards or fellow prisoners through letters, and in rare cases, reunions. Others buried their experiences, determined to move forward in a society that preferred silence to uncomfortable truths. The memory of the first shower, of soap and water and the absence of cruelty, remained a private touchstone, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there could be moments of grace. In the years that followed, the stories of German women who had survived American captivity faded into the background of a nation preoccupied with rebuilding and reckoning. Post-war Germany was a landscape of silence and survival, where the past was often buried beneath the urgent demands of the present. For the women who had been prisoners, this silence was both a shield and a burden. Few spoke openly about their experiences. The stigma of surrender lingered, reinforced by a culture that valued sacrifice and stoicism above all. Many women married, raised families, and found work in the New Germany. Their time in the camps never mentioned, not even to their closest relatives. Others struggled with the weight of memory, haunted by the knowledge that their survival was seen by some as a mark of shame rather than resilience. Yet, in rare moments, the truth surfaced. Some women, emboldened by changing times or the gentle inquiries of historians, shared their stories in interviews or memoirs. Their voices were quiet but clear, describing the shock of capture, the fear of the unknown, and the profound relief of discovering dignity and care in the most unexpected place. They remembered the taste of fresh bread, the comfort of clean sheets, and, above all, the simple act of showering with real soap, a moment that, for many, symbolized the restoration of their humanity. On the American side, the legacy of the camps was preserved in military reports, Red Cross records, and the memories of those who had served as guards or administrators. For some veterans, the experience of overseeing German women prisoners was a lesson in the complexities of war, a reminder that the enemy, once stripped of uniform and ideology, was often just another human being, vulnerable and in need of compassion. Letters and photographs, tucked away in family albums or archives, told stories of unlikely friendships and moments of grace. The impact of these experiences rippled outward, shaping the early years of the U.S. occupation of Germany and the long process of reconciliation between former enemies. American officials, eager to foster goodwill, pointed to the humane treatment of prisoners as evidence of their intentions. German officials, for their part, were slow to acknowledge the reality of surrender. But gradually, the narrative began to shift. The stories of women who had survived captivity, once hidden or denied, became part of a broader conversation about war, memory, and the possibility of forgiveness. Over time, the memory of the American camps took on new meaning. For some, it was a bitter irony, a reminder of the distance between propaganda and reality, between fear and experience. For others, it was a quiet affirmation that even in the darkest moments, there could be light. The American camps were not paradise, but for women who had faced the abyss, they were a place of safety, dignity, and, above all, survival. As Germany rebuilt and the world moved on, the memory of these women remained, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of compassion in the midst of war. Their stories, once whispered in the shadows, now stand as a quiet challenge to the myths of enmity and the boundaries of forgiveness. History is often written in the language of battles, treaties, and the rise and fall of nations. Yet, within the margins of these grand narratives, there are quieter stories, moments when the boundaries between enemy and ally, victor and vanquished, are blurred by simple acts of humanity. The experience of German women POWs in American camps is one such story. For these women, the war's end did not bring immediate freedom or joy. It brought uncertainty, stigma, and the daunting task of rebuilding lives in a world forever changed. Yet, in the midst of captivity, they found something unexpected: dignity. The memory of a hot shower, the scent of real soap, the gentle professionalism of a nurse or guard. These became touchstones, reminders that even in defeat, they were not stripped of their humanity. For the Americans, the decision to uphold the Geneva Convention and treat prisoners with respect was more than a legal obligation. It was a statement of values, a quiet assertion that compassion could exist even in the aftermath of unimaginable violence. The legacy of these camps, preserved in letters, photographs, and the memories of those who lived through them, is a testament to the enduring power of decency. As the years passed, the stories of these women faded into the background of a world eager to move on. But their experiences remain, quietly challenging the myths of absolute enmity and reminding us that even in the darkest chapters of history, there is room for grace. The simple act of showering with soap, so ordinary, so easily overlooked, became, for many, a symbol of survival and hope. In the end, the story of German women POWs in America is not just about war. It is about the choices we make when faced with the suffering of others and the possibility of finding light, even in the most unexpected places.